Hi, my name's Michelle. Today we're going to be reading The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is chapter 1. Quick overview of what happens in this chapter. We meet our protagonist, or the main character, Katniss Everdeen. She's a 16-year-old girl living in District 12 of a country called Panem. Panem exists where North America used to be. We meet her younger sister, Primrose, or Prim Everdeen, as well as her mother and her friend slash hunting partner, Gale. We learn a little bit about what life is like in District 12, as well as what the Hunger Games are. So let's get into this. The story opens with Katniss waking up and realizing her younger sister Prim is not sleeping in the bed next to her anymore. She looks over and sees that she's sleeping by their mother. She describes her sleeping mother, as looking younger, still worn, but not so beaten down, and also says, "My mother was very beautiful once too, or so they tell me." This is a big contrast in the way she goes on to describe her sister Prim, who she says has a face as fresh as a raindrop, as lovely as the primrose for which she was named. She then goes on to describe their cat Buttercup and tell a story about how Primrose brought this cat home and thought he was the most beautiful, wonderful creature ever. So Buttercup is described as the world's ugliest cat, mashed in nose, half of one ear missing, eyes the color of rotting squash, with a muddy yellow coat. Prim actually named him Buttercup because she insisted that his coat was yellow like a buttercup. Katniss did not want this cat when she brought him home, but eventually gave in. She was worried about having another mouth to feed, but now realizes he actually is useful at keeping away the mice and rats, so she tolerates him. So just in this first page, where Katniss is describing her family, you can already see there's a big difference in the relationship with her mother, which seems like maybe she doesn't have the most positive feelings about her mother compared to her sister, who she views as like innocent and good. And we see that in the way they're described and how Primrose feels about this cat that Katniss insists is the ugliest cat in the world. Anyways, Katniss quietly gets dressed and she leaves the house. We find out she lives in District 12, which is the coal mining district. She specifically lives in an area called the Seam. Usually at this time of day, all the coal miners would be getting ready to go off to work, but right now the streets are empty because it is reaping day. She makes her way to the fence topped with barbed wire. It's supposed to be electrified, but they usually only have 2 to 3 hours of electricity in the day, typically in the evening, so it's hardly ever on. She slips under a loose spot in the fence, and she grabs her bow and arrows from a hollow log. At this point, as she's making her way through the forest, we find out that her father died in a mine explosion when she was 11, which was 5 years ago. Before that, he taught her how to find food in the woods. Being in the woods like this is actually illegal. They're not allowed to leave that fenced area. However, she says most people in the district would risk it if they had weapons. She has a bow that was crafted by her father, and even goes on to say that her father probably could have sold more bows, but then that would look like he was arming the citizens of District 12, and that would not have been looked kindly on. The peacekeepers of the district, they mostly turn a blind eye to the few people who do hunt because they want the fresh meat that they bring in. And then we have a quote. "When I was younger, I scared my mother to death the things I would blurt out about District 12, about the people who rule our country Panem from the far-off city called the capital. Eventually, I understood this would only lead to more trouble. So I learned to hold my tongue and to turn my features into an indifferent mask so that no one could ever read my thoughts." At this point, she meets up with Gale at their spot, which is a rock ledge overlooking the valley. She kind of describes Gale as the only person she can be herself with. She loves her sister, but she doesn't feel like she can say the things she truly thinks in front of her sister because she doesn't want Prim to repeat those things and then get in trouble. So he offers her some real bread, which they can usually never afford, and they share the bread and goat cheese that Katniss had got from Prim. We learn that Katniss's mother had been part of the merchant class that mostly catered to officials and peacekeepers. The people in the merchant class are a little bit better off than the people that live in the Seam. They are more comfortable since they serve the wealthier clients, and they're not usually as hard pressed for food. Her mom's family ran an apothecary shop. They were healers, and that's what most people use because citizens of the district can't afford doctors. However, when she chose to marry Katniss's father, she had to kind of leave behind that more comfortable lifestyle that came with being in the merchant class. As they're sitting there eating their food, Gale says they could leave the district and live in the woods, but then adds, "if we didn't have so many kids." This is referring to their siblings. Gale has 3 younger siblings, and Katniss, of course, has Prim. She says she never wants kids. He says, "I might if I didn't live here." Katniss says, "But you do." Then in her mind, she's like, "we can't leave, so why bother talking about it?" She doesn't see the point in even having this discussion because they can't leave. And she also can't imagine leaving Prim because Prim is the only person that she's sure she loves in the world. Katniss then wonders where this stuff about having kids comes from. They never had anything romantic between them. It took them a long time to even become friends and help each other out. This is one way that I think the books really differ from the movie. In the movie, I think there's more of an implied romantic relationship. Once I read this next quote, you can see that's really not the way Katniss looks at it at all. Besides, if he wants kids, Gale won't have any trouble finding a wife. He's good looking, he's strong enough to handle the work in the mines, and he can hunt. You can tell by the way the girls whisper about him when he walks by in school that they want him. It makes me jealous, but not for the reason people would think. Good hunting partners are hard to find. So they fish and gather a bag of greens and a gallon of strawberries. They stop at a place called the Hob, which is a black market that operates in an abandoned warehouse that once held coal. They trade some of their fish for good bread and salt. They exchange half of the greens for paraffin. They stopped at the mayor's house then to sell half the strawberries, knowing he was fond of them and could afford to pay for them. There, we meet Madge, who's the mayor's daughter, and she's kind of the closest thing Katniss has to a friend besides Gale. Both Katniss and Madge tend to keep to themselves a lot, but sometimes that means they kind of keep to themselves together. Madge is already dressed up and ready for the reaping ceremony, and Gale compliments her on her dress. And then he kind of just gets really snarky with her after this because she says, "Oh, thank you. I want to look nice in case I get called." And he's like, "There's no way your name would ever get called." And that's because we learn that from ages 12 to 18, you get one entry into the reaping pool for every year, which is the same for every citizen in all 12 districts. However, if you're poor, you can opt to add your name more times in exchange for tesserae, a 1 year's supply of grain and oil for one person, and you can do this for every member of your family. So every year, Katniss has her name entered 4 times and Gale 6 times in order to get tesserae for their entire families plus their normal one-time entry. This means that somebody like Madge would only have, 5 entries, whereas Katniss has 24 and Gale has, I think, like 42. We get this quote from Gale that Katniss is remembering. "It's to the capital's advantage to have us divided among ourselves." And with this, he's referring to the fact that the starving workers in the scene essentially have to sacrifice their children by having them take out tesserae to help feed them so they don't starve. But then that means that their children are way more likely to get called to go into the Hunger Games, whereas the children in the merchant class are a lot less likely because their names are entered way less times, since they are not forced to take tesserae. At this point, they divide the remaining food and they head home. Prim and her mom are already ready, so Katniss takes a bath, and then she kind of reluctantly lets her mother help her get ready. You can tell she's not used to letting her mother help her do anything. Once she's finished, Katniss hugs Prim because she knows that Prim is really nervous. This is Prim's first time being in the reaping ceremony, but she also knows that Prim should be safe because her name will only be in there one time. She did not allow Prim to take any tesserae. So they eat their lunch and they head to the square for the ceremony. Attendance is mandatory unless you are on death's door. The kids that are part of the ceremony line up in the center and their families are on the outside. While Katniss is doing this, she's kind of thinking about how many things they have to do in order to survive. And we have this quote: "Gale and I agree that if we have to choose between dying of hunger and a bullet in the head, the bullet would be much quicker." And that really just has to go with them breaking the law by hunting in order to feed their families. We learn that District 12 has a population of about 8,000. There's a stage in the front of the square. There's 3 chairs. One is empty. Mayor Undersea is in one, and Effie Trinket, who is District 12's escort from the Capitol, is in the other chair. Right away at 2, the mayor stands up and he tells the history of Panem, that was once North America. He lists the disasters and encroaching seas that ate up the land in the brutal war over what was left. And Panem came, which is the capital and 13 district. Then there are the dark days where the districts rose against the capital. The 13th district was destroyed. The Treaty of Treason gave us our new laws to guarantee peace, and as our yearly reminder that the dark days must never be repeated, it gave us the Hunger Games. For the Hunger Games, there's 2 tributes from each district, 1 boy and 1 girl that participate. They fight to the death, and the last standing wins. The capital requires the Hunger Games to be treated as a festivity, and the winner receives a lifetime of ease back home. Their district gets prizes for the next year, which is mostly food, while the rest of the districts are battling starvation. The mayor reads the list of the 2 victors from District 12 in the last 74 years. There's only one living, and that is Hamish Abernathy, which at this point he staggers up onto stage, very obviously drunk. Effie then says, "Happy Hunger Games, and may the odds be ever in your favor." Effie digs out a name from the girls' bowl, and it's Primrose Everdeen. So we end this chapter on a cliffhanger. It's mostly an introduction and kind of building out this world for us, so we can kind of just start understanding where we are and what's happening. One thing to remember is that Katniss is the narrator. We are seeing everything through her eyes, and it's being interpreted through her mind. So that's something we just want to keep in the back of our mind as we're moving forward. Additionally, we can see that there definitely seems to be struggle in these districts. There's a lot of suppression going on. They have the peacekeepers in the district that keep order. They have limited access to electricity. It seems like a good portion of the district is constantly battling starvation. There's just a lot of suppression through these Hunger Games where they're literally having to sacrifice their own children as repayment for their revolt 74 years prior. Yeah, all these things the capital is using to control the districts through suppression and through controlling their access to food, their access to energy. They have really strict laws to kind of prevent people from acting out. Yeah, so join me in the next video so we can go over chapter 2. We can also get more of a look into this world and into the Hunger Games.